and bloody video games are very common nowadays, but back in the 80s, especially in the arcades, it was a rare sight to see. In an era where games are primarily targeted to children, Namco released Splatterhouse in the arcades in 1988 in Japan and 1989 worldwide. This was way before Doom, before Night Trap, and before Mortal Kombat, so game rating systems like the ESRB weren't even thought of back then. Yet here you have a horror-themed beat-em-up with blood, gore, and other disgusting stuff you'd see in an R-rated slasher movie. Interestingly, it didn't generate the kind of buzz and controversy that Mortal Kombat did nearly half a decade later, though it's likely because this is a spooky game and that made it easier to get away with the things it did. Gameplay-wise, Splatterhouse is, at its core, very similar to single-player beat-em-ups like Kung Fu Master. Monsters, ghosts, flying objects, and all that stuff comes straight at you, and all you gotta do is punch or kick them down. And sometimes, you might even come across a weapon or two that will help you crush those monsters easily, like a wooden plank, a meat cleaver, and even a shotgun, though the latter has very limited ammo, so use it wisely. In the story of Splatterhouse, you play as Rick, a college student who has to save his girlfriend Jennifer, who has been kidnapped inside a mansion. Rick is then given a very powerful hockey mask that makes him stronger so he can fight off the undead. It is called the Terror Mask. Now you might notice that Rick looks an awful lot like Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th franchise, and, well, yeah, he does. But unlike Jason, Rick is the hero and he doesn't go around killing innocent people. Beyond the horror themes and violence, Splatterhouse is also a very tough arcade beat-em-up. You don't always simply walk to an enemy and punch them right away. Sometimes you gotta think a bit and pay attention to their patterns, especially when it comes to boss fights. Now it may not seem hard in earlier stages, but later on, oh boy, it definitely gets harder. At the same time, if you're thinking of what moves to do next, don't wait too long, or else the void from behind you will come and easily devour you. Not every stage has a void coming after you though, but the ones that don't have it are the auto-scrolling stages. Oh, and make sure you avoid falling into as many traps as possible. They can work as alternative routes, but after a while, you'll start to get annoyed by them. Every time you lose a life, you're sent back to the last checkpoint and don't continue right where you left off like other beat-em-ups. This also adds to the challenge. So after you defeat Hell Chaos, Rick leaves the mansion, but Jennifer is presumed dead. The Terror Mask is gone, Rick is back to normal, and the mansion is burning down. And that's Splatterhouse, one of the best arcade beat-em-ups of all time, and a perfect game to play for the spooky season. There were a couple of home ports of Splatterhouse back then. The first and most notable port is the NEC PC Engine version, as well as its North American counterpart, the TurboGrafx 16. As you can see in the PC Engine version, it's a pretty good port. Obviously it's nothing like the arcade version, but for the hardware it's on, it's a worthwhile port. Keep in mind that the PC Engine is the very first 16-bit console, though it actually had an 8-bit CPU. The difficulty in this port is noticeably easier, so this port is perfect if you never played the series before or you're a beginner at beat-em-ups. Now when it comes to the TurboGrafx 16 version, there are even more noticeable differences. In this case though, it's localization changes. The first thing you notice right away is Rick's Terror Mask. It's purple colored and it has a completely different design, meaning it's no longer a hockey mask. This was likely done to avoid any legal trouble with Paramount Pictures, the owners of the Friday the 13th franchise. In addition to this change, all crosses and religious references have also been removed. Apparently NEC had very similar censorship policies as Nintendo did back then. Despite these changes, it's still a good port, but nowadays I would recommend going with the PC Engine version since you can play both of them on emulators now. Plus the Japanese version is entirely in English, so language barrier is of no concern here. Both the PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16 version of Splatterhouse were re-released on the Wii Virtual Console in 2007 in their respective regions. In 2011, the PC Engine version was released in Japan on the PlayStation Network for the PlayStation 3 and PSP as a PC Engine Classics title. The second port is on the Japan-exclusive console, the FM Towns Marty, from a company called Fujitsu. This port is surprisingly very close to the arcade original. Matter of fact, I think it's pretty close to being arcade perfect. I don't think I have much else to say about this port. It's a shame that the best home port was on a console that nobody outside of Japan got to play at the time. In the arcades, Splatterhouse would only see one installment. However, there were many installments in the franchise exclusively on consoles, including 2 sequels exclusively for the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive. The first is Splatterhouse 2, released in 1992. If you love the first game, you're gonna love this one even more, as it is a true sequel that will easily satisfy fans of the original. At its core, Splatterhouse 2 is the same as its predecessor, single-player beat-em-up, and you just destroy monsters and evil things left and right. And there's even more weapons like the chainsaw. And of course, like the first game, Splatterhouse 2 is a tough beat-em-up, especially in the later boss battles. I do hate the annoying stuff that comes down from the elevator segment in Stage 8 though. They just drop down randomly, and it's kinda hard to think of a strategy to avoid them. By the way, there's this swamp monster in Stage 3 that does this Michael Jackson sound when you hit it and falls into water. In Splatterhouse 1, Jennifer died after being turned into a monster. However, the terror mask lets Rick know that Jennifer is actually still alive inside the mansion and can be saved. Great way to set up a sequel. Though, didn't the mansion also get burned down? Speaking of the terror mask, now it has a more distinct and original look, giving Rick his own identity and looking less like Jason, though I'm sure most people will still make that comparison. This game also has a password system to continue where you left off, and there are infinite continues. All in all, Splatterhouse 2 is a fantastic sequel, and it moved the story forward. Splatterhouse 2 was re-released on the Wii Virtual Console in 2008. Next up is Splatterhouse 3, also for the Genesis / Mega Drive. Splatterhouse 2 did everything it could to be a faithful sequel, and it delivered. This one though? This one is kinda weird, and quite frankly, I'm not a fan of this one. Before I talk about my gripes with this game, let's get the positives out of the way. So Splatterhouse 3 goes in a new direction. Instead of the familiar gameplay that was taken from Kung Fu Master, Splatterhouse 3 plays more like a Final Fight Streets of Rage style beat 'em up, and when you die, you continue right where you left off, so no more checkpoints. You also have a new power meter in which you have to collect Allie-RX orbs to fill it up. Once there's enough in the meter, you press the A button, or whichever you configure this button to transform into a monster that can easily destroy regular monsters. Lastly, it's a non-linear beat 'em up, meaning you can walk around the mansion, but you have a map to use and you have to know where your destination is, which is marked as a big red X. Sounds pretty awesome, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. I love the idea of a non-linear Splatterhouse, and I don't mind it playing more like a traditional early 90s beat 'em up. So, what exactly is the problem? The problem is the time. See, you don't really have to complete each stage on time, but if you take your time in most of them, you're gonna get very different storylines and completely different endings. Whereas if you play and beat the game as quickly as possible, you get the good ending or the true ending. And when I mean quickly, I mean quickly. Let me ask you a question. Are you a Splatterhouse 3 speedrunner? If not, then you better start practicing, because you basically need to be a speedrunner in order to beat the game and get the good ending. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm not a fan of that. I like alternate endings, and I like non-linear games, but most of the stages have a relatively short time limit. Believe it or not, the one I had the most frustration with was Stage 2. Jennifer has a bone worm that can turn her into a monster, but if Rick makes it to her on time, she'll be saved. But the thing is, her transformation doesn't happen when there's no minutes left. Wanna know when it happens? When there are only 2 minutes left. Yeah, 2 minutes. And the time you get in this stage is only 6 minutes. So you have 4 minutes to reach to her. So yeah, good luck trying to beat this if you aren't as skilled as a speedrunner. Later in the game, you also have to rescue a kid named David, so in order to get the good ending, you need both characters alive. There are 4 endings: Jennifer and David alive, Jennifer dead but David alive, Jennifer alive but David dead, and both dead. And in order to get both of them alive in the ending, you need to complete most of the stages really quickly. Look, I love a challenge, and I praise the first 2 games for this reason as well. but this is just too much. I am sorry. Trust me, I tried and tried, and I really wanted to have fun with this game, but the time limit alone made me never want to touch it again. I know Splatterhouse 3 has its fans, but I just can't get into this one. I don't think Splatterhouse 3 is a bad game. There are other aspects of the game that I really love, plus the graphics and presentation are very good. Also, it has some realistic looking cutscenes, but it's just so damn frustrating. Fortunately, like Splatterhouse 2, 3 also has a password system, and I use that to skip a lot of things to record enough gameplay footage. All in all, I would recommend going into Splatterhouse 3 with neutral expectations. You might love it, or you might rage quit like I did. Lastly, there's the Famicom exclusive Splatterhouse Wanpaku Graffiti, which translates to Splatterhouse Naughty Graffiti. This is a chibi spin-off of the Splatterhouse series that's more kid-friendly than the rest of the games. Interestingly though, this game still contains religious references like the original arcade game. That's probably why it didn't see a localization like the TurboGrafx 16 port of Splatterhouse. For the plot of the game, apparently Rick is dead, but he is resurrected and Jennifer is happy to see him. But a new villain emerges, the Pumpkin King, and kidnaps Jennifer. Unlike in the main Splatterhouse games where he punches and kicks and sometimes finds a weapon, Rick carries his axe at all times, although you can sometimes use a shotgun. And like in the other games, shotgun ammo is very limited. There are some elements of the beat 'em up games, but overall, it's a platformer 95% of the time. You have a single health bar and you also have experience points like an RPG. The more enemies you kill, the bigger your health bar grows. But keep in mind that if you lose all your health, it's game over. Yeah, there are no lives in this one, it just continues, and you have a limited number of continues before you have to start from the very beginning again. Fortunately though, this game has a password system, and you can continue where you left off with that. This game isn't as hard as the main trilogy, but it still has some challenging moments, namely the Pumpkin King final boss. You just gotta pay attention to the enemy pattern so that you don't get hit repeatedly. Oh yeah, and the ending reveals that the whole game is a movie that they were filming. Yeah, this game breaks the fourth wall. All in all, Splatterhouse Wanpaku Graffiti is a really good side-scrolling platformer with a mix of beat 'em up. All the text is in Japanese, so the language might be a problem by default, but you can find a fan-translated ROM out there, like the one I'm using right here. So that's it for the early Splatterhouse games, an awesome spooky slasher movies inspired beat 'em up franchise from Namco that more people should play. There's also the Splatterhouse 2010 remake for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, but for now I will be skipping that one. I feel that it deserves its own separate video down the line. Anyway, I'm Allie-RX, and I want to wish you all a very happy Halloween 2024, and I know content has been very slow, with the exception of shorts, but trust me, I am cooking, and the next thing I'll cook will be something truly special. See y'all soon.